Military veterans of Reddit, what are your best stories from boot camp/basic training? Story 1. There are so many stories to choose from. One of the funniest is who we had to salute, every living being. Literally. So I'm walking back from a med appointment I had when a squirrel crosses my path. So I render a snappy salute and bark out a good morning, sir. Just as an officer is walking across the street from me. He ran across the street to investigate just who the hell I was saluting. I responded, the squirrel, sir. He said, what the duck? You saluted a squirrel? Yes, sir. Who's your company commander? Petty Officer Shanks, sir. Okay, move on dumbass. And stop saluting squirrels. Yes, sir. Story 2. We had a kid in my boot camp platoon named Jackson. The senior drill instructor was Sergeant Jackson. Poor recruit Jackson was known as recruit laundry number 38 for the whole time because he didn't rate the name Jackson. Story 3. The first couple weeks of boot are full of medical and dental exams, and if you need a procedure, you get it done right there. Tons of guys had their wisdom teeth pulled, and we had one guy come back right before lights out with his mouth full of gauze and loopy from the drugs. Our DI called us all to the center of the room, formed us up, and then told us to sit Indian style on the floor, and that recruit Toothy was going to tell us a bedtime story. He pulled up a chair for Toothy, and then told him to tell us the story of the Battle of the Monitor and Merrimack. Toothy mumbled that he didn't know the story, so the DI told him to just make it up, and for every fact that he got right, we'd get to sleep an extra 5 minutes in the morning. What followed was like a live episode of Drunk History, minus any factual accuracy. As best as Toothy could recall, the Monitor was British, the Merrimack was Old Ironsides, and that in the end, they shot the shit out of each other and everybody died. The end. We were all dying laughing, but the DI sat there stone-faced. After Toothy was done, DI just stood up and said that is exactly how it happened. Well done, got up, turned off the lights, and walked out. Story 4. In the barracks where I did my basic we had cubicles. Our bunks were separated by a half wall. My bed and the bed of the troop next to me were both against that half wall. Part of our layout for inspection was a specific set of gear on the bed. One morning inspection our platoon sergeant decided that the bed layout of the troop next to me was utter shit, so the sergeant flipped the mattress so hard it landed on my bunk covering my layout. So after the sergeant finished reaming out the troop next to me he takes one look at my bunk and starts reaming me out because apparently I think I'm special and deserve 2 mattresses. Story 5. One of the guys fell asleep during fire watch. One of the drill instructors ambushed him and told him that he was now dead. So then he had to go around being a spooky ghost. So he has to walk around with a sheet over his head booing and shaking everyone's racks. It would have been hilarious if I wasn't so damn tired. Story 6. I had the pleasure of witnessing this one myself. At the end of the chow line the MTIs have a table called the snake pit. The MTIs randomly pull out trainees and question them on stuff we're supposed to know. One day, they pull out one poor sap from our brother flight. It went roughly as follows: TI, trainee. What is the insignia of the full colonel? Trainee, the insignia of the colonel is the bird, sir. TI, what type of bird exactly? Trainee, permission to adjust, sir? TI, adjust. Trainee then proceeds to set his tray on their table, put his hands up in the Egyptian pose but with both hands outward, turns his head to the side and says like this, sir. The onlooking T's nearly choked on their food while the questioning T stared at him dumbfoundedly for a few moments before yelling at him to get his shit off of their table and get the duck out of their sight. Oh, that was probably one of the best times I've seen a T at a loss for words. Story 7. Brother was in basic and doesn't read it. He was in the chow hall and witnessed a T, authority figure, call out someone who had placed their flashlight in their belt. I guess you're not supposed to do that. So the T lights him up. Is that where you keep your ducking flashlight? Is it a ducking lightsaber, Luke? He made him stand at the end of 2 cafeteria lines, holding his flashlight like a lightsaber and striking dead the airmen that were leaving the 2 lines. At one point, there was a lull in traffic and the T screams, "Oh, so ducking lightsabers don't make noise when they're motionless?" So old buddy has to make the bzzzzehmmm noise as he waits for his next victim. Story 8. When I was in boot camp there was one evening near the end when the only drill instructor present at the time had to run see the first SGT for some reason, forcing him to leave us alone for a few minutes. Normally he would have gotten a drill instructor from a nearby squad bay to duck with us the whole time, but it was almost over and he was the junior DI and not really into duck games, so he simply said just don't ducking run around screaming naked. He wasn't gone for 30 seconds before 3 recruits were galloping around butt-ass naked screaming. Looking back, it was highly indicative of how the next 5 years of my life would be. Story 9. I'm an Army vet. One morning in basic training, it was about midway through our 3-month cycle and we were lined up for breakfast chow. While waiting in line, we had to stand at parade rest in columns of 2 in our PT uniform. We couldn't move or anything at the risk of being pointed out and screamed at. The uniform consisted of somewhat black short shorts and a gray t-shirt that said Army on the front. Well, 3 guys in front of me had one of those no-reason boners and the drill sergeant caught him as he was trying to move to hide it away. He pulls him off to the side and starts screaming. "What is wrong with you, private? Why are your privates saluting in the chow line?" Of course this yelling spread to the ears of 2 other drills and they came over as well. "Hey battle, come look at this, hey it ease that shit, private." As this was said, they noticed and one drill sergeant bent down, face inches away from the full-mast culprit and bellowed at ease. "Private, you better get that shit in check." I entered into the building before I could hear anything else about it. To this day I still don't know how the drill sergeants went through that without so much as a smirk. Story 10. One time this guy decided that he would test out his newly stealth skills by leopard crawling up to a roo. A massive eastern gray male, who was ripped as duck. He was from the city and had never really seen kangaroos outside of zoos. He learnt fast. The SECO, section commander, was in stitches whilst we pulled the roo off him. Story 11. We had a drill sergeant make a private carry a branch everywhere she went so it would replenish all the oxygen she was wasting. We had a guy named Fitzwater. We called him Fatswater. We weren't just calling him just cause he was fat. He was a lazy piece of shit who was constantly pretending to be hurt to get out of work. Anyways, he got pissed at us one day and said, "If anyone calls me Fatswater again, I'm going to tell drill sergeant." Immediately the drill sergeant walks in and goes, "Hey, what's up, Fatswater?" A mother of one of the other privates sent him a photo of a drill sergeant trashing a locker, with a letter saying, "Hope your drill sergeant isn't as mean as this." It turned out that it was a picture of our drill sergeant. He had posted on Facebook that ended up going viral. She was just looking up pictures of drill sergeants and it just happened to be him. Story 12. A woman in my company was from Africa. She had a graduate degree in some science, so she was very smart, but some things were lost on her, especially figures of speech. When we were on the firing range we were told to keep the rifle up and down range, meaning no matter what way you were facing, the end of the rifle was in the air and pointed down range. She didn't get that and swung her rifle all over the place. Everyone hit the ground. One of the drill sergeants yelled and asked her if her brain took a shit in her head. She didn't understand that either. Story 13. When I was on Paris Island, we were drilling on the parade deck and this one recruit kept ducking up. Our drill instructor stopped us, stalked up to the recruit, and started wearing him out. Gave him the classic DI, screaming in both ears, spit flying, smacking him in the face with his cover. Eventually, the recruit broke down and silent tears started streaming down his face. The DI took his finger, wiped a tear from the recruit's eye, and licked it, telling the recruit, "Now I own your soul." Ducking intense. Story 14. A cousin of mine was going through training for the Royal Australian Navy. They have leader cadets amongst their ranks, whom you must refer to as leader and not sir. One of these leaders was prowling about and asked my cousin if he was all sorted out. "Yes, sir," my cousin said, on reflex. "What the duck did you say, cadet?" 20 push-ups, right now. My cousin, you should know, is a massive shit stirrer. Couldn't help himself. "Yes, sir," he says, getting down to do the push-ups. 50 ducking push ups, the leader barks. The way he told me the story, the timing was just perfect. "Yes, sir." So he had to do 100 push-ups, his arms gave out around 70 apparently. Later on, they were doing open water survival training, floating about in a blow-up raft in the middle of the ocean. The leaders, who were submerged below the raft in scuba gear, would occasionally leap up and drag a cadet into the water to simulate being knocked overboard by a wave. Sure enough, the leader my cousin had crossed was under the boat. He burst out like a shark, seized my cousin by his collar and dragged him into the freezing water. Holding him down for longer than was probably necessary, the leader eventually released him. As my cousin was climbing back into the raft, shuddering from the cold, the leader asks him, "Still think you're funny, cadet?" As you can guess, the reply was, "Yes, sir." He got grabbed and pseudo-drowned again immediately. I guess he's a glutton for punishment. He passed training, by the way. Story 15. During my basic, the last Harry Potter book was coming out and a lot of people were having their parents mail them like 50 pages at a time in their letters. Eventually our instructors found out and brought the company in a room and gave away every major plot point in the book. Who died and when, and just ruined the book for like hundreds of people. It was absolutely the darkest, funniest thing I've ever heard. To make it even funnier, When we were out in the woods and getting the trucks that brought MREs unloaded, they made kids get sticks from the woods and have wand fights in order to see who could get eat first. It was pretty damn funny. Also, as a fun little side story, we had this one kid in our platoon that really hated that they had given away the book, so he decided to really get under the instructor's skin, and on a few occasions he really did lighten the mood and really did get the instructors pissed. A couple of examples come to mind. First being one time during PT we were doing like jumping jacks or something, and right as we came to a stop he asked the instructor if he could ask a question. Now at this point, the instructors knew very little of what this particular kid would turn into. So they let him ask his question. He simpled asked instructor, "Don't you think it would be a good idea if we renamed the 4 platoons in our company after the 4 houses in Harry Potter?" And they just ripped us a new one for that. I will admit, it was hard to be mad at the kid when we were doing push-ups because I was laughing so hard. Another good example, we were watching some crappy videos about how to be good people or how to have moral character or something, and the lady that did it would ask us to give examples of good moral character, and the same kid kept bringing up examples of Harry Potter, like when Ron was mean to Hermione and when Harry like exhibited bravery or some shit. They had him forward march into a wall for like an hour for that one. He never missed a step. He was a magnificent hero. Wherever you are, I salute you. Figuratively, of course. I think he's probably still enlisted lol. One day we were doing one of our required ruck marches. One thing you realize in basic is that it's literally designed for retards to pass. So it really is as retard proof as possible. Well, about halfway through basic, in the army at least, you start focusing a lot more on the combat aspect of things. Very basic patrolling, shooting, etc. Well, we go on one of these patrolling ruck marches. Essentially you just walk for like 12 miles in full combat gear with like 40 tons of weight on your back. It's not bad, just boring. Anyway, one girl was scared that she wasn't going to pass it, so she filled up her ruck and camelback. It's like a water bottle backpack thing, with MRE trash. Well, she got super dehydrated she didn't have any water, and shit her pants and passed out. They put her in the ambulance and she threw her pants out the back, and the ambulance stopped and put them in a bag and threw them back in at her. It was really funny. Our instructor liked to do forced hydration after that one like non-stop. Back to Private Benjamin though. On the same ruck march they were randomly selecting kids to make sure they had their full packing list right before the walk. By this time Private Ben had developed quite the name for himself. Well, of course he gets randomly picked and he has nothing but like socks and shit in there. The instructor loses his goddamn mind. He's like yelling and shit and finally asks what the duck he was thinking. Private Ben said, and I quote, "I didn't think it was fair that I had to carry that extra weight when I'm already carrying a 60-pound dick." He got his ass smoked for like an hour before we even began, and they made him carry a new ruck with what I'm sure has to be twice the weight, plus he had to carry water jugs instead of the M16 rubber duck they gave us. This kid had balls and was a tough mother ducker. He had no strength, no athletic ability, nothing, but man, that kid never quit, and I knew he was hurting. I remember giving him a bunch of these power bar things I stole from the cafeteria because I thought he was going to die. Quite possibly the funniest thing I saw though was one of the days we were in the classroom, some higher up officer that was in somewhat shape or form in charge of some of the training during basic, came in and wanted to get to know some of the soldiers. He asked why a few of them decided to join the army. Of course Private Ben's hand flew up. I saw one of our instructors' face immediately fill with regret, but it was far too late. The officer called on him and he said that the reason he joined the army was because his level 80 paladin got banned on World of Warcraft and he tried to bite a kid at school over it, and that afterwards his guidance counselor basically told him his only hope was the military. The officer just instantly picked someone else. Of course I'm in tears. Story 16. Ah, yes, the pinecone incident. So, I was at basic in Fort Benning, and we were zeroing our weapons as a company. Zeroing a weapon is when you ensure it shoots where you want it to by shooting a paper target repeatedly. Sounds easy enough. Now, I am a terrible shot. I know this. Everyone knows this. However, I get even worse when I'm being screamed at. I spent hours on the line until, finally, there were only 4 of us cats who hadn't gotten a go in the whole company. We had 3 more hours of range time, and if we failed to zero, we'd be recycled. Recycled entails having to revert to another company earlier along in basic training. So, not only do you lose your buddies, but you catch a couple extra weeks of training with a unit that knows you're a shitbird of some sort. So, a fate worse than death. After another unsuccessful grouping, my drill sergeant, without a word, picked me up from the prone position and stood me up. He looked at me and said, "Go find me a pine cone." Confused, I took 4 steps, scooped up a pine cone and took it back to him. I presented him my findings, and he responded, "Private, that's not my pine cone. Go find me my ducking pine cone." Keep in mind, this is a forest in Georgia, there's a metric shit ton of pine cones. So I jog off and work on my mission. This entire time, my DS is shooting all my rounds off, genuinely enjoying himself. Every pine cone I bring to him is not his pine cone. This continued for about 15 minutes while the rest of the company, sitting in a clearing eating MREs, cheered me on. Finally, I breathlessly run up and hand him another pine cone, about to jog off to grab another. He looks at me, then the pine cone, then me. "Steve." He yells, "You found Steve, Private." I shit you not, I had never been more relieved in my entire life, until his face scrunched into a grimace. "Wait, Private, where's his family?" Who the duck takes a pine cone away from his family? So, terrified, I spend around half an hour scavenging for appropriate sized pine cones, while he fires maniacally. Eventually, I hunt down his wife and his 2 kids. At one point I brought Steve's estranged son, Dennis, and I needed to do push-ups for causing Steve emotional duress. Anyway, he lets me fire. After I prop up the family to cheer me on, I go prone, and I zero on the first iteration. He picks me up again, cracks the only smile I ever saw from him, and says, "It was all in your head, you dumb duck. Good job. Now go do push-ups till I'm tired." He also had me write my congressman later that day to apologize for wasting taxpayer money on bullets. Fort Benning, never again.